Good morning, everyone. This is Nathan Lindorf with the Rational Independent. It is Monday morning, and for today's Reddit Rant, we are going to be discussing a Newsweek article about Lauren Boebert's opinion about the Black National Anthem performed at the Super Bowl. So we have some heavy-hitting topics to get into today. So much the same as some other articles we've covered recently, this appears to be a bit of a tempest in a teapot. One of those articles that doesn't really have a lot of substance. As I looked at it and thought about it, from what I can gather, it really appears like this is an article about Lauren Boebert. In other words, this is an article that discusses the character of a political person. This is, in an unflattering way, put more bluntly, this is an article that is an attack on someone who is politically your opponent, someone who aligns with the other party in partisan politics system. Newsweek is famously left-wing. It's one of those outlets that has a serious bias. It's very easy to see, and they don't really make very much attempt to try and hide it. So it doesn't shock me at all that they have an unflattering picture to present for a congresswoman who is not very powerful. I mean, I think she's in her second term. She barely won re-election. But for whatever reason, they really want to kind of dig into her. So let's discuss the points the author makes and try and go a little deeper and find some substance here. The interesting thing about leftist bias is that they often utilize language that is tied to a purity test or a litmus test. In other words, they castigate the character of someone they disagree with by identifying things they've done that make them a bad person. And they frame it so that people that this bad person oppose, they're bad because they oppose things that are good. In other words, they characterize a political disagreement through an overtly moral framework. So I'll give you an example. As you're looking at this article, it talks about how this anthem was first performed during and made famous during the Civil Rights Movement. And the Civil Rights Movement is one of those holy touchstones in leftist mythos. The Civil Rights Movement is an unalloyed, unapologetic good in American society. Goes without saying, but this ties into this whole conversation. Of course, it's a good thing for people to have equal rights. Full stop, period. No one's arguing the other side of that particular case. But I think it's foolish to pretend that every single action taken by people who align themselves with the Civil Rights Movement was the right action. That every single person involved was fundamentally a good person because they were involved with the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, the simple truth is, Martin Luther King Jr. is an inspiring leader and clearly a charismatic speaker, and he espoused high ideals that we should all live up to. He was also famously incredibly unfaithful to his wife, and that's unfortunate, but it's reality. So in this article, it's interesting to me that they are framing her opposition to the Black National Anthem essentially through a lens of saying she must be therefore opposed to the Civil Rights Movement and, by extension, equal rights for all citizens of the United States. It takes you a couple of steps to get there, but that's the thrust of their argument. They use a lot of innuendo and indirect language, but it is what it is. So they reference the NAACP, people who are representative of the NAACP, and they cite these people as authorities on something that is an unalloyed good, again, the Civil Rights Movement. Setting aside the fact that the literal acronym NAACP is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. In other words, it is an overtly biased organization. In the name, it says we want to advance the political position of a particular group of people identified by their skin color. Inasmuch as they pursued and achieved a certain degree of equal rights for all citizens, regardless of skin color, I'm fully on board for that. But any organization regardless of what flavor of melanin they decide to promote, any organization that pushes for the advancement of one skin color over another, I can't go there with you. I actually agree with Martin Luther King that we should be judged not by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. I'm aiming for nuance here. I'm hoping it's coming across clear. But it's a challenge because this article is very fluffy. There's not a lot of substance to it. But it essentially is attacking the character of an elected representative, trying to cast her in a negative light. One piece that I thought was interesting is that in addition to the civil rights movement and the NAACP, the article specifically calls out the Black Lives Matter protests that were an attempt to decry, I might even say a righteous effort to decry, quote, the murder of George Floyd at the hands of the police, unquote. George Floyd is a whole thing that we're probably going to have to dive into at some point. But it is not that straightforward. It's been crafted into an example of white racist police officers that put the black man under their boot and are willing to murder an innocent black man because of his skin. That's the narrative around George Floyd. And here, it reinforces that. The murder of George Floyd at the hands of police. That's inflammatory language. What does that have to do with a tweet about the Super Bowl? It assassinates the character of an elected representative whose politics you disagree with. That's why it's here. When it comes back to, again, the idea of some of these things that are just completely good in the pantheon of leftist ideology. It's Black History Month. This is a meaningful song to African Americans. This is an event that's a historic first. 2 black quarterbacks in the Super Bowl. Every one of those sentiments casts this whole conversation in a racial lens that is unflattering to the author's political opponent, to an elected representative whose politics he disagrees with. Does it have to be a racist conversation? It doesn't have to be, but it seems like the author wants it to be because he thinks he can win that argument. We're talking about a tweet. Maybe 20 seconds worth of thought by someone discussing a football game, not even a football game, the entertainment associated with a football game. We are like 3 degrees separated from anything substantive, and yet we want to drag every single racist stereotype and racist framing in order to make this a conversation that sounds like, isn't that Lauren Boebert a bad person? She must hate black people. I don't think I'm overstating it. That's how this article is framed. It even goes so far as to, and this is my favorite thing that reporters do, quoting an anonymous Twitter user. Say, another Twitter user responded to her tweet. They don't give the name. So you want me to go and scroll through a thread and try and find the person who said this? This could be someone who's a crackpot, someone who has no followers. This is clearly someone who doesn't have much credibility because the author didn't even bother to name them. And yet their opinion is feathered into this article with the same weight as other references that are named. In the body of the text, it just goes bam, 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 bam. And you have to parse through it and see, oh wait, this is a random anonymous Twitter user? I don't know if you've ever been on Twitter. It's full of weirdos and crazy people. I'm one of them, so go figure. But this person said she needs to take her ridiculous white grievances somewhere else. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. So her conversation must also be racially based. It's a white thing. It's a racial white grievance, and it's ridiculous. I'm not the one that cast this conversation in a racial light. This is the author. The other thing I thought that was kind of interesting is that it specifically calls out the NFL. But it describes the NFL's actions in light of, or in reaction to, the Black Lives Matter protests with confronting systemic racism and considers that a good. It's praising the NFL for their efforts to confront systemic racism. Systemic racism is a buzzword. It's a keyword. There's a handful of keywords in the jargon right now in the political lexicon, and it's important that we learn them because they are used to mean a specific thing. For instance, if you're not familiar with political conversation and you hear the term equity, when I first heard it, the only time I'd ever heard equity before that was in relation to the value of my home. Do I have equity in my home? Do I have value in my home over and above the loan that I carry on it? That was the meaning that I imprinted on the word when I first read it in a political context, because that was the only thing I'd been familiar with. It's not what they mean. Equity is a key word used to describe a philosophy that advocates for equality of outcome. And again, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's a whole conversation, probably be a live stream, really needs to be broken down in detail. But here, I want to point that out because they use another one, systemic racism. Systemic racism ties to equity, but it's a little more insidious than that. Systemic racism says, if you have a society where you don't have equal outcome, it must be because the system is stacked against certain people. So if you can measure a population, and in our case, in this circumstance, Black people are underrepresented among CEOs or head coaches, or their income is less than another population, or their wealth is less than another population, their net worth, their education level. Slice it up any way you like. If you can find a stat that shows that a certain population is not performing as well as another population, that disparity must come from systemic racism. The system must be biased. It presupposes bias within the system, because if the system was fair, you would have equity. It's a little bit to unpack, but it's a very subversive idea. It is deadly to our republic. This is a real problem, and it needs to be opposed wherever it is found. It is not idle words to state that the NFL is doing these things to confront systemic racism and to frame that in a positive light. We live in a world with a lot of different news sources, a lot of information, more information available to the average person than has ever existed. More information, but I think it's less reliable. I don't have a source that I could go to or refer you to say, if you go here, you're going to get solid, reliable information every time. Human beings are biased, and modern information systems enable that bias. And that's probably a whole other conversation in of itself. That being said, I was confronted with a question. Since this article is essentially an attack on Lauren Boebert's character, where do I go as an average citizen, not an academic, not a politico? I'm just a dude. I've got some kids, I've got a job, trying to pay my bills, trying to stay sane, maybe get a little bit of sleep. Basic life, okay? I have no special access, no special privileges, and I had to ask myself a question when I was preparing for this video. Who is Lauren Boebert? I'm actually only 1 degree removed. I live in Colorado. She's not my representative. She's a little bit west of where I live, but she's basically my next door neighbor, geographically speaking, geopolitically speaking. And yet, I confess, when I came into this, I knew almost nothing about her. And I'm not the only one. She's only been on the scene for a little while. She's made some controversy. She's made a splash. She's made some headlines. But if you're asking the question, if you're proposing as the crux of your argument, the character of a particular person, how do we decide her character, given that we know relatively little about her? That was my question that I had to confront. Now, this may not be where everybody starts, but I went ahead and I started here and I Googled her. First page that comes up, Wikipedia. It's not exactly an authoritative source. But again, we're all regular people. We're reading this article. Maybe this Newsweek article comes across your feed, comes into your Reddit profile, comes into your Facebook thread, whatever, and you read it. And it took me 4 minutes to read it. It's a very lightweight article. And it just feathers in a bunch of aspersions that attack her character. Where's the counterpoint to that? I'm probably doing more effort than most would by trying to research it and read her history. Some of the highlights from Wikipedia, quote, her campaign succeeded in appealing to independence and rebellion, thus getting the necessary votes. So within Wikipedia, within her political bio, they're saying that she advocates for rebellion against the government that she's an elected representative of. That doesn't strike me as very fair or unbiased. They say that her husband is a natural gas consultant for some energy company, one of Colorado's largest natural gas producers, and 4th in the nation in methane emissions, which is a veiled allusion to greenhouse gases, climate change, and essentially saying, look at this couple. The husband is a highly paid consultant by this evil natural gas producer that's destroying the planet. That's an association that's not that big of a jump. Why does that need to be in here? Why frame it in that way? So it says right at the start, she supports Trump's false claims that the 2020 election was stolen from him. Let's bring Trump in here. Let's smear her with that brush. Trump is an incredibly divisive figure. Everyone who's been in the mix in this business is aware of that. Bringing him in and associating her with him is going to color your view of her character dramatically based on if you love Trump or if you hate Trump. I'm ambivalent. There's some things I like about Trump. There's a lot that I don't. When I meet someone who is rabid Trump supporter, I'm kind of repulsed. It's not really my jam. I don't follow the cult of personality. Same things when I've meet someone who's a rabid Barack Obama supporter. It's kind of off-putting. Throwing all your loyalty on a particular person, it feels monarchical. But by bringing this here and further, not just by saying she's aligned with Trump, but overtly stating Trump made false claims about the 2020 election. Well, that's kind of a matter of opinion. It was never adjudicated in court. It was never ruled on by an authoritative body. Now, politically, it's a dead issue. Move on. It is the sort of thing that is water under the bridge. In a dynamic electoral system, sometimes people cheat. Sometimes they get away with it. Whether or not they got away with it, the system moves on. It's one of the ways it ensures its own integrity. If we stop the system to try and adjudicate something for too long, we crash the system. But stating it as a fact that his claims are false, I think it's a bridge too far. Also, just this is a beautiful sentence. And again, this is a lot of signaling. This is a lot of, here's some hot button issues. And depending on how you feel about these issues, that's going to tell you how you should feel about this person. She opposes transitioning to green energy, COVID-19 mask and vaccine mandates, abortion, sex education, sex reassignment surgeries for minors, and non-heterosexual marriage. Those are some factual statements. That relates to policy. I appreciate that. Those are also a lot of divisive hot button issues. And it's framed in such a way that it doesn't provide any backing for what she actually has said, what she actually believes on this issue, any sort of nuance. It just says she opposes these things. And these things, if you're inclined to agree with what the author has said so far, you might say, well, then she must be a bad person if she opposes these things that I agree to. So I'm trying to put a little more effort into my videos. I'm trying to make them a little bit deeper, a little more thorough. I'm also trying to learn how to change the cadence of my voice. I enjoy doing these videos. I know I have a tendency to pause sometimes. I try and think through the issues. I'm cautious in my speech, but I know it can be distracting if I pause too much. So I'm going to do my best to present information as fair as I can, to dive into the issues of the day and to try and help each of us learn how to think a little deeper about the world that we live in and about the political pressures that push on us from left and from right. I hope you all have a wonderful day.